Chris Athens, Sterling Sound, Senior Mastering Engineer. Traditionally, mastering is the final step in the production process before a record becomes a record. So when you finish your production and you have it mixed, the next step is mastering, and what happens there is the final EQ, compression, and sequencing of an album. It's the thing that puts the whole record together before it goes to the manufacturer to be duplicated. So this is a pretty good example of a record that's been overmodulated. It's a little bit too loud. You can hear when you play it low a lot of the compression artifacts and the distortion in the low end. This track probably would have been better served by being a little lower. I'm assuming that the distortion came sort of in the process of whatever they did at the last minute to make it loud, although it can happen at any point, even when you're recording. Most of the time it happens at the end of the process when people realize suddenly that their record's not as loud as Jay-Z's and they start cranking things up. The other problem with this particular track is that it's in mono, which I'm pretty sure was unintentional. This is also an issue that comes up quite a bit. It's a strange thing, but sometimes people don't realize that they're making their mix mono, and sometimes it happens when they're printing it off to the final medium that they're going to send off to the plant or to the mastering engineer. But reasonably sure that the whoever did this didn't intend for it to be mono, but it is. So this is a track where what I'd be able to do to it to enhance it is fairly minimal. It's pretty bottom heavy. I would kind of leave the bottom end alone and maybe kind of enhance the mid-range a little bit, but it sounds reasonably good in the mid-range and a decent balance, so I would probably not do too much to this track. And like I said before, you can't undo distortion, so there's nothing we'd be able to do about that. The first tip for making my job easier would be not to turn it up as much as everybody does these days. One of the things that I think people do a lot as a habit, and this is a good thing in a way, is listen to other people's records while they're working to get a comparison. One of the problems with that is that most of the time when people are listening to other people's records, they're listening to something that's finished and mastered and done, and been done. And in some cases, you're comparing, things that are being done in your bedroom to stuff that was done in, $1 million studios and is completed and finished and mastered. And the tendency is to really turn things up, to start to just jam up the levels so that you can get a fair level match when you're comparing the two. And the problem with that is that it's really easy to distort things if let that get out of hand quickly. And I very frequently, especially these days, because so many people engineer their own stuff now, I get records that are distorted, and for whatever reason people didn't hear it when they were doing it. Maybe it was just the time or the sound of their speakers or whatever it is, but I'll get stuff and I'll put it on and hit play and go, oh boy, what am I going to do with this? And I think if you're just a little bit more disciplined about the amount of level you put on a track and listen very carefully to the overall sound to make sure you're not distorting it in a way that's bad, you give every mastering engineer in the world a big break. Sterling in general we're very fortunate that we do lots and lots of the Billboard Top 100 every week. About 25% comes through here, and of every imaginable genre. But from me in particular, let's see what's new and coming out. I will probably be doing the next Clips record and doing a lot of work for the Neptunes. I'm doing just finished Carl Thomas's album. I do a lot of work for Bad Boy, and kind of in the middle of Method Man's record, so that should be coming out pretty soon. So this track, much more conservative levels on the final print of the song, and this is in stereo, which is a good thing. It's not distorted, sounds good. What I would do to this track is probably do some things in the low end to make the kick pop a little more, and sort of simultaneously tighten up the bottom end, but at the same time give it a lot of force. I wouldn't do too much in the mid-range because the mid-range is pretty present, and in fact that shaker sound to me is a little bit loud in the mix. What I would probably do to that is carve out a small notch and decrease the level of those frequencies, probably in the 7 to 10K range, by a couple of dB or so, just to tame that upper mid-range sound a little bit and give it a better balance overall. But I wouldn't do too much. It's even though it's low level, it's fairly well compressed. There's not a lot of dynamics to it, so I wouldn't over compress it. Might just touch it a little bit, maybe not at all. That's pretty much what I would do to this track, and I think that would be sufficient. So basically what I'm doing to this track right now is I'm compressing it just a little bit. I actually backed off a little bit on my compressors over here. And I'm adding a little bit of high frequency limiting with this de-esser. And what that does is it's interesting alternative to just turning down the EQ of the upper mid-range. High frequency limiting is almost like an automated version of EQ. It allows you to take the high frequencies and set a threshold over which it compresses those high frequencies, and so it reduces them to a degree. But when that threshold is not exceeded, it doesn't do anything to the sound. So as a result, it gets in and out very quickly, and it messes with the mix as little as possible, which is really what you want. You just kind of want to tame those upper mid frequencies a little bit. The other thing I'm doing to it is I'm adding a little bit of low end, around 100 hertz with a fairly narrow Q, which allows me to take the kick drum sound and make it pop out just a little bit more. The low end on this is nice sounding, and it has a good depth to it, but the kick could use a little bit more force. So the reason why I'm using a narrow Q as opposed to a wide one on 100 hertz is to keep from making the bass overwhelming sounding, because a narrow Q, for those of you that don't know, is it actually is boosting less of the surrounding frequencies. 100 hertz is the center frequency on a parametric EQ. If you've got it set to 100 hertz, that would be referred to as the center frequency. And other frequencies are also boosted surrounding that center frequency, but depending on the Q, it can either be a wide array of frequencies or a very narrow band of frequencies. And I'm using a narrow band of frequencies because I only want to affect that narrow area so that the bass doesn't become overwhelming. In addition to that, I'm doing a cut at 8K by about a dB with a medium Q, just to continue to bring down that shaker sound in the upper mid-range and hopefully warm the track up a little bit and give it a slightly better balance. And that is what I would do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a CD from this that I just loaded in, and I'm using a program called Sequoia as my main mastering editor and CD maker. So I'm just going to trim the beginning to clean it up and listen to it. So we want as little of that hum as possible. We're going to trim it right up to the beginning. So pretty much like that. I'm going to make sure it starts at 2 minutes because that's the Red Book audio standard, and that's what I make all my CDs at, especially reference CDs. And typed in 2 minutes. Make sure it starts at 2 minutes, and I'm going to trim the back end of it. I'm going to listen to how it fades. It fades off very abruptly, and there's a lot of hum in there, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of smooth out that fade, help get rid of the hum a little bit, but try and keep sort of a natural sound at the end. And there's not a whole lot to work with there, so the other option, of course, is to do a fade on the track itself, which, you know, may not be what the artist had intended, but if, for instance, it made no difference to the artist, or the artist wanted a fade. In some cases, artists will send us tracks that are longer than they need to be on purpose so that we can fade it for them. And in fact, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to do that to this track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a fade for them since it ends abruptly and kind of awkwardly. When you're doing a fade on a track that ends cold like that, what you want to do is be out before the last beat, because if you hear this last little beat in the bottom of the fade, it'll sound kind of weird. The thing about fades is that you're trying to give the impression that the song sort of goes on forever and, you know, kind of drifts off into the distance. That's kind of what fades do. And so if you have that little kind of break at the very end, sort of low and subtly, it's very distracting. So what I'll do is just slide this edge here so that it ends before that break, and then I'll extend the fade out back into the song so that it'll fade smooth to the end. And with most good editors like this, you can change the curve of the fade itself to kind of get the effect that you're looking for. I find that in cases like this, most of the time, cosine is the best, smoothest fade. So now instead of ending cold, it would sound like this. And that's a little bit better than that cold fade, I think, so probably be good to go with that. Now that it's in place, I'm just going to set my markers. Anybody know the title of this song? All right, so we'll just call it track 2. Now I've named it, and next step is just to make a CD out of it. Just got to put a CD in my writer and burn it, and then you'll have the before from the original and the after from this.